Lesson 3, I will decompose non-unit fractions and represent them as a whole number times a unit fraction using tape diagrams. So first of all, let's review a little bit about what we did yesterday. Okay, so yesterday we decomposed, or lesson 2, we decomposed unit fractions. So let's talk about a unit fraction, because today we're going to talk about non-unit fractions. So if I had a whole and it was divided into thirds, I would I would create a sum of unit fractions. These are unit fractions. They have a numerator of 1 and then they have a denominator of how many parts they are. So today we're going to break down non-unit fractions. So if this is a unit fraction, then this would be a non-unit fraction. So we're going to decompose this as a whole number times a unit fraction using tape diagrams. So we're going to talk about how instead of writing 2/3 equals 1/3 plus 1/3, how can we make this a whole number times a unit fraction? And we're going to get into that in just a second. Okay, so let's take a look at our problem set and let's take a look at the direction. Decompose each fraction modeled by a tape diagram as a sum of unit fractions. Come back here. Write the equivalent multiplication sentence. The first one has been done for you. I love it when they do the first one for us because that gives us an idea of what's expected. So you can see that they decomposed this tape diagram into a sum of unit fractions. So here's the 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, and then we're going to write it as a equivalent multiplication sentence. So this is basically exactly what you just did in your journal. All right, so let's take a look at B first. So first of all, I've got to figure out what fraction this represents. So I see 2 out of 5, so that tells me that this is going to be 2/5. Okay, so we've got 2/5, and we're going to write that as a sum of unit fractions equals 1/5 plus 1/5. So this is basically what we did in lesson 2. Now we're going to rewrite 2/5 as a multiplication sentence. So our whole number is 2 because we have 2 1/5, and we're going to multiply it times 1/5. So this means I have 1/5 2 times. All right, let's try again. All right, if you feel like you can do this one all by yourself, go for it and then come back and see if you did it correct. All right, so hopefully you took the time to at least try to do this. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 out of 6, and that's going to equal 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6. So you should have written that 5 times. As a multiplication sentence, that is 5/6 is equal to 5 times 1/6. All right, let's take a look at D. So again, if you did not feel confident trying to do C by yourself, we'll pause the video and try to do D by yourself. I think this is a pretty easy concept to figure out once you understand what we're doing. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 8. So I have 6/8 is equal to 1/8, and I'm going to write this 6 times. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So much faster to write the multiplication sentence, isn't it? 6/8 is equal to 6 times 1/8. And notice how I make my whole number as tall as my fraction. That keeps me from getting confused between the fractions and the whole numbers. All right, so this one's a little bit different. So you're going to notice, first of all, it's greater than 1, okay? But that doesn't really change anything, except it does change the number that goes on the bottom. If you thought to yourself that this was 4/4, that wouldn't be true, because in order for this to be 4/4, this would have been the whole, okay? But because this is not the whole, that tells us that this is not 4 out of 4. This is actually 4/3. Because my whole is divided into 3 parts, that tells me these are thirds, and I have 4 of them. So my fraction would be 4/3 is equal to 1/3. And you're going to do this 4 times. And then as a multiplication sentence, 4/3 is equal to 4 times 1/3. Okay? All right, let's take a look at number 2. Write the following fractions greater than 1 as the sum of 2 products. So we're just going to add these 2 fractions together. So these are greater than 1. I know they're greater than 1 because here's my whole, and then I have more than one whole. So I'm going to look at my whole and see how many parts it's divided into. It's divided into 1, 2, 3 parts. So I know that these are thirds, okay, and I have 5 of them. So I'm going to say 5 thirds. Now it tells me I'm writing this as a sum of 2 products. Okay, well, a sum is an addition sentence, and a product is a multiplication sentence. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different because we did not do this in the journal. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to write a multiplication sentence to represent the whole. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 1/3. So I'm going to put this in parentheses. 3 times 1/3. So that's the same thing as saying I've got 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So instead of saying 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3, I'm saying 3 times 1/3. And then down here, I've got 1/3 plus 1/3. So instead of writing that as an addition sentence, I'm going to add this to this multiplication sentence. 2 times 1/3. So I've got 3 times 1/3, that represents the whole, and then I've got 2 times 1/3, and that's what represents what's left over. Okay, let's try this one more time. This is new. So again, here's my whole. It's divided into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. So I know that these are fourths. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. So this is 6 fourths. So I'm going to write a multiplication sentence to represent the whole. So I've got 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, and 1/4. So instead of writing 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, I'm going to say 4 times 1/4. And I'm going to add that to the multiplication sentence that represents this last part. So I've got 1/4 plus 1/4. Why don't you try to write what you think the multiplication sentence would be for these last 2 fourths? And then pause the video and come back. Okay, so hopefully you said I've got 2 times 1/4. So we've got 4 times 1/4, that represents the whole, and then 2 times 1/4. All right, let's take a look at number 3. It says draw a tape diagram and record the given fractions decomposition into unit fractions as a multiplication sentence. So this time we're basically going to do what we did on the front, except we have to draw our own tape diagram, and we don't have to write it as a decomposition of unit fractions. We can just write the multiplication sentence. So that's going to save us our hands from spending so much time writing. All right, so this is 4/5. So that means I have to divide this into 5 parts. So if I want to divide it into 5 parts, I'm going to draw 4 lines, because when I draw one line, I divide it into 2 parts. My second line divides it into 3. Now it is divided into 4, and now it is divided into 5. So you can see I didn't make these very even, did I? So I might go back and try that again. So since my first box line was too little, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So let's try that again. All right, so I've got 1. Now I've got it into 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, 5 parts. That looks better. All right, so now we're going to shade. So remember, I'm going to use my highlighter. You can use your pencil to shade. Just remember that you're going to lightly shade, because we don't want to hide where you just divided this tape diagram into parts. So you don't want to take your pencil and color so heavily that you can't see the lines where you separated it. All right, so now we're going to write this as a whole number times a unit fraction. So we've got 4/5 equals, and how many fifths do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to have 4 times 1/5. So that's going to save us from writing 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5 4 times. All right, so if you feel like you can go ahead and try to do B by yourself, go ahead and then come back. The worst thing that happens is you get it wrong, and that's okay. We'll just erase it and we'll work on it together. All right, so my fraction says eighths. So I'm going to divide this into eighths. I like to divide it into half first and then divide it into fourths. This helps me to make my eighths nice and even. So now I've got fourths, so if I come through here and I divide every one of my fourths in half, I end up with 8 boxes. So once I do this, I'm going to go back and count and make sure I do have 8 boxes. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I do have eighths. Now I'm going to shade 5 to show 5 eighths. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And notice how quickly I shade. I don't want to spend 10 minutes coloring tape diagrams. As long as they're nice and neat and you can read them, that's good enough. All right, so see if you can write this as a multiplication sentence. Pause the video and come back when you think you have it. Okay, hopefully you felt confident enough to do this. Instead of writing 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8. So instead of writing 1/8 5 times, we can say 5 times 1/8. So hopefully you're starting to feel a little bit more confident and feel like you can maybe do one of these by yourself. If you feel like you can, C would be a good one to try to do by yourself because it's just like A and B. If you get stuck on D, come back because D and E are just a little bit different. All right, so hopefully you tried to do this one by yourself and you should have thought to yourself, well, it says 7/9, so that means I'm going to divide my tape diagram into 9 parts. So that means I'm going to draw 8 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that one worked out pretty well. So let me count, make sure I have 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now I'm going to shade 7 out of 9. And now I'm going to come back and I'm going to write this as a unit fraction times a whole number. So I've got 7/9. So instead of writing 1/9 7 times, I'm going to write 7 times 1/9. Now, D is just a little bit different because it's greater than 1 whole. And I know this because my numerator is greater than my denominator. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and draw my tape diagram. I just realized that I have not been labeling my whole and my tape diagrams. Unfortunately, I should have been doing this and I forgot to label this 1 whole. All right, but we're going to do it on this one, okay? So we're going to label this 1 whole. It's kind of getting a little bit tight. Now, my whole here is going to be less than the whole entire tape diagram because I have more than 1 whole. This tells me how many parts to divide my whole into. So I'm going to divide it in half, and then I'm going to divide my halves in half. So now I have 4/4. So this is 1 whole. That's what this is right here, 1 whole. And then over here, I'm going to have 3 more. So actually, I think I'm going to make my tape diagram just a little bit longer because I have to have 3. Be easier just to add on. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fourths. So now I'm going to highlight or shade my 7/4. And then we're going to write a multiplication sentence to represent this. So I think I'm going to do it down here. So I've got 7/4 equals 7 times 1/4. All right, so now we're going to try 7/6, and it's going to be very similar to 7/9 because it is actually greater than 1 whole. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my tape diagram. go ahead and get rid of these little extra ones right here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and label my whole here. So I've got 7 out of 6. So my whole has to be 6 parts. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tape diagram, and I'm going to make this my whole because I'm only going to have one extra part. So I'm going to make it about right down here, and I'm going to label this one whole, and I have to divide this into 6 parts. So I'm going to start by dividing this in half, and then I'm going to divide each half into thirds. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, and then here's my 7, 6. It's a little bit bigger, but that's okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight 7 out of 6. And then we're going to come back and write our multiplication sentence. Why don't you see if you can't write this multiplication sentence by yourself and then come back. This will be the last one that you get to practice with me. Okay, hopefully you took the time to pause the video and write this. And hopefully you put 7, 6 is equal to 7 times 1, 6. So this is a non-unit fraction, which is right here, and we decomposed it into a whole number times a unit fraction. All right, so when you get ready to practice this by yourself, make sure that you come back and use your problem set as an example.